So this is a video that I've wanted to make ever since I started posting consistently on this channel, but I never did, as I know how passionate people could be about their favorite games in the Final Fantasy franchise, and I didn't want to upset anybody with my list. I've been working in journalism ever since 2016, getting to write about the NBA among many other things. And earlier this year, I applied to a gaming publication and submitted an article that I wrote to them about the games that I believe are the top 5 games in the Final Fantasy franchise. Ultimately, I never got hired, but I felt that with the kind of lack of JRPG news that we're seeing right now, that I should turn that article that I wrote into a script for this video. Regardless, I hope that I'm able to get across why I place each of these games where I do in this top 5 list, and ultimately, at the end of the day, I just hope you enjoy this video as well. Starting off at number 5, we have Final Fantasy X. Having Final Fantasy X at the 5th place spot might rub some people the wrong way, as I know many people who have it in the 1st place spot in terms of their favorite Final Fantasy games, but in my eyes, 5th place is the perfect spot for it. Final Fantasy X is an excellent game, but I really do believe that nostalgia takes over for people when they talk about this game and just their love for it. One of the first things and the biggest things that jumps out to me is the voice acting in this game that you can certainly tell is a product of its time. When the game released back in North America in 2001, having voice acting in a Final Fantasy game was a huge step up compared to the previous games in the franchise. Of course though, like many other video games, as well as even animated movies that released back or around 2001 that contained voice acting, there's many scenes where it sticks out like a sore thumb.
What am I supposed to say? You tell me it's my decision. But I don't have a choice, do I? You're the only one who can tell me what's going on anyways. I have to go with you, I have to!
The voice acting for characters such as Wakka and Lulu is actually pretty darn good, and in the case of Wakka, Wakka is voiced by John DiMaggio, who actually voiced Bender in Futurama, as well as Jake the Dog in Adventure Time. But there's a reason that a number of memes still exist for lines said by Tidus and Yuna throughout this game.
You probably shouldn't laugh anymore.
I'm personally not super fond of the leveling in this game either. Developer Squaresoft went with the sphere grid system. Rather than traditional leveling, each character has their own sphere that you can upgrade by winning battles and earning AP. The APs are used to level up the grid and activate different abilities or stat boosts. You can also earn ability spheres by making enemies drop them. I can already see the hate comments for this take, but personally I would have just preferred traditional JRPG leveling opposed to the sphere grid, that's just all. With my 2 major complaints out of the way, I can pretty much say that everything else in this game is very enjoyable in my eyes and has aged pretty well. The Blitzball game mode is very fun once you get the hang of it, and it's essentially just water polo with Final Fantasy flair to it. 6 players represent their respective teams while every player is completely submerged in water. That's just about the most Final Fantasy take on sports that I've ever seen. I also think the combat system is pretty great. This is one of the very few areas of the game that didn't stray away from its typical JRPG roots, and I really enjoyed it. That of course is saying a lot, as it's probably the most important area of the game for a player to enjoy, obviously. With skills, special attacks, magic, and summons, it's very easy for any JRPG fanatic to jump into this game and not need much time to get acclimated with the controls. Overall, the combat system is quick, smooth, and eventually profound enough that it does a good job of keeping JRPG enthusiasts engaged for the entirety of the game. And I also think the visuals were pretty mind-blowing playing it when I was much younger back in the day. The 6th generation game consoles, which were the PS2, original Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube, really made a priority to show off how much the water technology had advanced since the previous generation of consoles. So that should help a younger gamer understand why beautiful beaches and water areas make up a number of locations in this game, as well as other games released during the 6th generation. The story is an allegory for religion where you basically take down God in the end of the game. And while personally I'm not a big fan of some of the villains in this game, most specifically Seymour, throughout my multiple playthroughs of this game over the years, I never had one playthrough or time where I really felt disengaged with the story or lost interest in it throughout my playthrough. Final Fantasy X certainly isn't perfect, and like I said, I do think nostalgia really drives a lot of people's love for it. At the end of the day though, it does feature a terrific combat system, a phenomenal soundtrack, and it really pioneered a lot of aspects that have been staples in the modern Final Fantasy games that have been released ever since. While of course I do have my criticisms of Final Fantasy X and I went over them here, I do believe that this game deserves its flowers, and I do need to recognize how groundbreaking of a title this game truly was. Next up on this list, we have Final Fantasy IV. Admittedly, of all the games on this list, Final Fantasy IV is the least recent game that I've played. I grew up playing this game on both my uncle's Super Nintendo that I was given as a child, and also the Game Boy Advance version of this game that I bought at Toys R Us as a kid. And some of my earliest gaming memories are tied back to this title. This game was important for adding a huge innovation to the combat system, and said innovation became a huge staple in future Final Fantasy games. This is the first Final Fantasy game to include the active time battle system. This system is one of my favorite combat systems in any JRPG, and the fact that this system would end up sticking around in the following 5 mainline Final Fantasy games speaks to how well this system worked. The entries in the series that used this system following the release of 4 added their own variations and improvements to the mechanics of its combat. I think all games putting their own twist on it is nice, but the original variation of the system is still very much admired. One element that was introduced in Final Fantasy III was changeable character classes. Sadly, that feature was not in this game. With the fact that this game is one of only 3 games in the franchise that allows you to have 5 controllable characters in your party, it would have been a big deal if they kept that feature from 3, which released a year prior in 1990, in 4 as it was released a year later. This does make 4 one of the more restrictive games in the entire series in my eyes, and even with 5 party members, 4 is one of the tougher games in the entire series. The storytelling in this game is among one of the many reasons people believe this is one of the most important games in the Final Fantasy franchise. Without spoiling anything, the game took a more dramatic shift than really any other JRPG or even RPG had at that point of release. The plot also feels more fleshed out and magnificent than JRPGs that were released around the same time as 4 was. While there are many better written RPGs or JRPGs that have released ever since, Final Fantasy IV was one of the best written JRPGs at the time of its release. The villains in this game are also off the chart. The main antagonist, Golbez, is praised by many fans, and understandably so. Without spoiling anything, I believe there's a very valid reasoning behind why people feel Golbez is the best villain in the entire series. I feel the same way about the villain for the game that I have the number 2 spot, and we'll get to that in a little bit. While Golbez isn't who I believe is the best villain in the franchise, like I said, I can see people's point, and it's not something that's hard to see. This game is an extremely easy recommendation for any gamer, especially a JRPG fan, and it's one that I feel is a must play for all JRPG fans. While many people might elect to play a more recent game in the Final Fantasy franchise, Final Fantasy IV is certainly a game that is one of the best games in the series, and is one that I would say definitely revolutionized the JRPG genre forever. Arguably the most iconic game in the franchise, Final Fantasy VII is in the 3rd spot. Final Fantasy VII is certainly a game that every JRPG fan needs to play before they can truly call themselves a JRPG enthusiast. Much like how 10 was a mind-blowing jump from 9, 7 was a remarkable leap up from 6. With this being the first Final Fantasy game on the 5th generation consoles, this was the first game in the series to use full motion video and 3D character models. Seeing Cloud with the spiky hair and giant buster sword, as well as Barret with the huge muscles and Gatling gun for an arm, was like the coolest thing ever to me as a kid. While Final Fantasy VI did in fact have steampunk style, environment, and setting, it still also rooted itself in traditional medieval fantasy as well. Final Fantasy VII goes all in on the futuristic aesthetic with its characters, environments, and even just the infrastructure of its locations such as Midgar. The main city in this game, of course, as mentioned, Midgar draws so much inspiration from the aforementioned futuristic aesthetic and ships the player into a whole new dystopian universe. While of course I think the combat is tremendously done and very fun, I think the strongest points for Final Fantasy VII is its story and its characters. The extremely emotional, sentimental, and dramatic story draws gamers in instantly and is the reason why we're currently in the midst of the release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. And I still have vivid memories of playing the game for the first time and watching Cloud escape the soldiers and jump onto the train. The very unique looking and also unconventional characters that make up your party make this such an easy game for gamers to fall in love with. We already spoke on Cloud and Barret, but among some of the other characters that you can have in your party, you have Aerith Gainsborough, a sweetheart hampered by her childhood trauma, Tifa Lockhart, a strong, nurturing woman always ready for a fight, and Red 13, a talking wolf lion with a flaming tail. And with all that said, it's not hard to see why gamers back in 1997 and even still today have fallen in love with this game and especially its characters. Also, the main villain, Sephiroth, is arguably the most badass and iconic in the entire series. Once again, like I said about Golbez, Sephiroth's not who I would say is the best villain in the series, but the silver hair, black trench coat, and the lengths gone to in order to torture enemies makes Sephiroth one of the most satisfying villains to face off against in any RPG or JRPG. And I'm excited to do so once again in part 3 of the remake series. With how iconic the soundtrack as well as the victory fanfare for this game is, I do need to give the soundtrack its flowers, and rightfully so, as it is just one of the best gaming soundtracks ever created. In my opinion, Final Fantasy VII is definitely one of the best video games ever created, but in my opinion, I just don't think it's as good as the next 2 games in this list. What I personally feel Final Fantasy VII may lack, I think it makes up for with its iconic characters and just everything that happens. And I don't even want to spoil what happens with Aerith, but I'm sure real ones know what I'm talking about. Like I said, this game does not have many flaws. I just don't believe it's as good as the next 2 games on this list. At number 2, we have my personal favorite game in the entire franchise, Final Fantasy IX. You might be asking why I have this game at number 2 if it's my favorite game in the franchise, and we'll get to that once we reach the number 1 spot. And I also will say I do like to have a layer of objectivity when I am talking about stuff like this. But one thing that I did state in my video when I talked about why we need a Final Fantasy IX remake a few months ago is that I do feel that this is probably the game in the series that is the most overlooked or the most underappreciated. The reason I say that is because at the Square Millennium event in 2000, Squaresoft showed off Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy X, and Final Fantasy XI. When the company developing the game simultaneously shows off the next 2 entries in the series that are releasing after you come out, you're probably going to be shattered a bit. It also didn't help that the game released on the PlayStation 1, which was looked at as dying hardware at that point due to the fact that the PlayStation 2 was set to release in the following year in 2001. Even with all of that working against it, Final Fantasy IX is truly what I believe represents what a Final Fantasy game should be. The dark tone of this game is something that I personally believe the player won't expect when they start up this game just due to the art style and the characters of the game. Most importantly, the game returns to its medieval setting for the first time since Final Fantasy V, and that's such an appreciated decision. After multiple games embracing futuristic approaches and environments, going back to the basics just worked. The story is extremely well paced and does a great job of making sure the growth, development, and progression of each character simply isn't rushed. The themes of identity, morality, and mortality come up throughout this game very often, and this makes the gamer go through such an emotional roller coaster that not many other Final Fantasy games really manage to, in my opinion. The story simultaneously manages to be uplifting and heartbreaking at the same time, and as I said in my Final Fantasy IX video from a few months ago, it's rare that any piece of media can manage to do that while really doing it well and leaving an impact on you. As I also pointed out in that video, I absolutely love Vivi and Kina, both for very differing reasons, and if you want to hear me talk about them in more depth, then definitely go back and watch that video. But the reason I said that is that Vivi really gives you the very introspective and warm-hearted moments, while Kina really acts like the comedic relief in much of this game. And I will say though, while I know many people aren't super crazy about the main antagonist, Kuja, I really do think Kuja is a great villain. Kuja is really only looking to be validated, yet all Kuja's ever felt in their heart is hate. Kuja's character development is very gripping for the player in my eyes, and that's why I believe Kuja is one of the best villains in the entirety of the franchise. And like I said when talking about Golbez before, I feel very similarly about Kuja in the way that they're very complex characters, and you have to really try to see where they're coming from. I also really did enjoy the combat, and I know that's a hot take because many people feel it is sluggish, and I even do acknowledge that I think it is a bit sluggish, but this is the final game in the Final Fantasy franchise to really use the traditional active time combat system. I will say though that remake is definitely probably needed because I'm sure that we could use a less sluggish combat system in this game and just something better. And honestly, I'm sure that the modding community has already done so and it really improved on the combat in this game. So maybe while it's still on sale, I'll pick the game up on Steam and see what's up with that. Of course, I also have to shout out the soundtrack. The track Melodies of Life is one of my favorite songs in any video game ever, and it's a beautiful way to send the player off at the end of the game. With that said though, Final Fantasy IX is of course my favorite game in the franchise, and it does so much well and not much erroneously. This game will always hold a special place in my heart, and like I said, I believe the character, antagonist, and the story is all very well done, but then why do I have it at number 2? Well, we're going to get to that in a second as I'm about to reveal number 1. Putting on my objectivity hat, I can firmly say that Final Fantasy VI is the best game released in the entire franchise. This game does so many things right, and we'll get to what those things are, while also doing a great job of delivering on its story. I've spoken on my love for Sephiroth and Kuja, but the antagonist in this game, Kefka, is without a doubt the best villain in any Final Fantasy. I might even go as far as say Kefka is the best villain in any video game ever. The amount of deranged, maniacal, and nauseating things Kefka does makes it so easy to see why he's able to get under the characters and heck, even the player's skin. And I really think the depths that the game goes to in order to fledge out every character's storyline really should be spoken on. The struggles and storylines each character faces or has to face makes things so much more interesting and engaging. Well, maybe not every character has a fledged out story. Characters like Umaro and Gogo both have their own weaknesses in terms of how they were written. Umaro's only real redeeming factor is that he's very useful when trying to gather a great deal of Celestials at the Colosseum. Gogo at least has the trait of being a versatile character in battle, but essentially has no story and just feels more so like a random recruitable character. While speaking on the combat though, I will say that Espers, while fighting, are also a very nice touch and add more flexibility and flair to a player's combat. Players can equip Espers, which are magical beings that can aid you profusely in battle. What makes it so robust is that after battles you unlock AP that then gets utilized to learn Esper spells and help aid you in battle. And with the game dealing with themes of oppression, ambition, and rebelling, this makes it such a great story and something that every gamer should experience. The game really touches on strength, resilience, and being tireless while fighting grief. These story elements certainly make it grip the player's attention and really makes it easy to sink so much time into this game. The one thing that I do have to mention is despite this game being over 30 years old, it still has not aged poorly. The graphics and soundtrack, even still on Super Nintendo hardware in 2025, still get the job done. Kefka's laugh also sounds super devilish even still to this day on the Super Nintendo. Definitely play it the OG way on OG hardware if you'd like, as it's still a great way to play and it hasn't aged poorly like I said, but of course you can get the Pixel remaster that released in 2021 of this game, and I would definitely recommend that one. The game's strategic breadth and profound character customization makes the traditional and classic turn-based combat feel as fresh as ever. Recruiting characters to your team also feels so exceptional and like an experience you won't get from a JRPG elsewhere. Final Fantasy VI is certainly a one-of-one game and a game that I recommend everybody experiences. The game truly feels like the epitome of what an old-school classic JRPG is. With dynamic character writing and one of the greatest villains in all of video game history, Final Fantasy VI essentially hits every nail on the head while still being able to develop the story as well as all of the characters in your party. Final Fantasy VI is truly a masterpiece of a game and quite possibly the best RPG released on the Super Nintendo. And with that, that's just personally my list and my opinion on the top 5 games in the Final Fantasy franchise and where I rank them. I want to know down below in the comment section what your favorite games in the Final Fantasy franchise are, or just anything relating to Final Fantasy as well. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, then make sure to give it a like as it helps me out a lot. And if you're new to the channel or returning to the channel and not subscribed, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the JRPG and gaming content that I have planned for the near future. Thank you all so much for watching though, and I am out. Peace.